Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're tuning in from. Welcome to the Truck Around and Find Out podcast, number 2. We're your hosts, Keith Couch with Rush Truck Center, Greeley, Colorado, and Rocky Mountain Peterbilt's on YouTube. And today's kind of Ryan's topic. I'll let Ryan introduce himself and get into what we're talking about today.
Heck yeah, absolutely. This is most definitely, in my mind, a truck around and find out a TAFO, because this is one of those things that, companies have got to get this stuff correct, or they just put so many people within their company and the people on the road at risk when they're not doing it. So today I want to talk about the drug and alcohol testing program. I want to specifically kind of bring in the mid-year report. I kind of looking at this, I really feel like at least, a couple times a year, we probably need to address what's going on with the drug and alcohol programs. So I kind of pulled the mid-year review of the FMCSA Clearinghouse to kind of get into this, and speaking of some alcohol here, I just gotta say I've been working to get my garage finished up out of the house that we just moved into up there in Windsor, Colorado. And I found this new beer. It's called Garage Beer, and how fitting for that to fit into the garage.
Who makes that?
I'm not prepared to answer that question. I just know it is Garage Beer. My son-in-law found it, and he recommended it. And I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of thinking that it was going to be a little frightening, but I got to tell you, I'm really liking that lime flavor. So I'm taking you've never heard of it then?
Nope.
Okay. Well, yeah, I just figured good topic since we're talking about some drugs and alcohol.
Are you supposed to put fruit in beer?
I think that's a mixed review, kind of like pineapple and pizza. So, some people would say no. I like lime in beer, and I know, anytime I go out for Mexican food, that lime in my Pacifico or Modelo or whatever, so, is always welcome. So with that, but anyways, kind of getting back on topic here with this drug and alcohol testing, it's a pretty intense topic. Partially, we're very involved in it because of the services that we do with Front Range Compliance and our drug and alcohol testing programs and that kind of thing. And this is just something that, could definitely, really, really cause some pretty severe problems within your organization, both from non-compliance, getting in trouble. You've got the fines that can come in. But the biggest thing that I've really discovered, especially since we've started our drug and alcohol testing programs, back in 2018, we've discovered that companies that don't adhere to these proper rules, they kind of become like a safe haven for people that like to use drugs or drink while at work and that kind of thing, that those drivers will just kind of flock to those companies, and it's just so important that these individuals and these companies, big, small, of all sizes, that they stay up on this. We've gone into a company that was operational for 40 years, but never really ran a true drug and alcohol program. You can believe that. They were operational with commercial vehicles and never once started a drug program. And they got popped. They had a driver get pulled over, and the officer found a driver with weed in them, and then with the truck. And then like the next week, they got popped, and they had a driver that had some methamphetamines. And the company reached out to us, and we went out and started working with them, getting them squared away. But step one was getting their program, and it was like 65% of their drivers all tested positive and had to be terminated, and they just kind of became this haven of where individuals knew that they could work and they weren't going to have to go through drug and alcohol testing. So you've heard that phrase, it only takes one bad apple to spoil the bunch.
Yeah.
Well, in this case, one somebody that comes in that's a user of these products, and next thing you know, they tell their buddies, and everybody's working there.
Well, you lose more than half your drivers. That could cost you some contracts, couldn't it?
It about cost us our contract with the company because they wanted to get rid of us. I had to literally go in and sit down with them and convince them that we were doing the right thing. They wanted to keep doing the same old thing. They just flat out couldn't understand why we were wanting to disrupt our workforce.
Wow.
Yeah, it gets a little bit interesting every once in a while. But what I've got today is I've pulled out the report from the FMCSA Clearinghouse, and Keith, I made you a copy of this, and we'll make sure that we put this up live, with our podcast, and so that you can pull this. This is a report that anybody can get. It's accessed by the public. If you go to the FMCSA Clearinghouse webpage for the FMCSA, you can pull this. They have their monthly reports that they put out, and this one is more of the mid-year report. So it's dated July of 2025. So we're kind of getting a mid-year assessment just to see what's going on with that. And there's a few points that I just really kind of want to make with this. When you go and you open up that report, about the first half of the report is just kind of dealing with just information regarding companies and drivers that have registered with the Clearinghouse. And that's great information. If you're into that type of thing, I'm not so much as worried as about who's registered and that kind of thing, even though, we try to make sure all of our clients get registered. But the big part of this is when you get to page 7 of this report, when it starts talking about the violations that are reported, what it does is it goes down and it breaks down from 2020 to 2025, all the different categories that you have seen that there's some positive drug tests that are out there. So, taking number 1, the winner all day long, and this is exactly where I'd expect to see it, and that's going to be, in with the pre-employment test. So a grand total, of these positive tests, there's been 186,000 positive tests nationwide since 2020. For the pre-employment. But when you jump down below that for the other testing circumstances, such as random testing, and post-accident, the random testing, it drops by half. So that means that, they've hired the driver's working, but somebody got popped for a test for controlled substances, and they failed their random. So that is running kind of right about the 50 percentile of where the pre-employment tests are.
And these numbers are from the Department of Transportation, correct?
So these numbers are pulled directly out of the
not
FMCSA.
Insurance or anything. This is DOT.
This is exactly all of the positive results that have been, reported to the FMCSA Clearinghouse in itself. So we all know when that Clearinghouse started, it was an absolute utter nightmare. And I know from my time with the Colorado State Patrol, they were talking about doing that Clearinghouse for a good 15 plus years before they actually got it up and running. It had its problems, but it is in fact working, with some of this stuff. So the points that I really want to make on this, and on this particular page, on page 7, is when you go through and you look at the random testing, post-accident testing, and reasonable suspicion testing, the numbers of reported violations during that type of test. For random testing, for the 5 years, 2020 through 2025, there was 107,648. So 107,000 random tests that came back positive with a violation. And that's not even counting the refusals, but you have post-accident, you had 13,000, total in there, positive tested drivers. But then when you jump down to reasonable suspicion, 5,300. I think, when we talk about the theme of this podcast, the Truck Around and Find Out, when you take in the sheer number of reasonable suspicion tests that they've had, and you look at the total of 120-some thousand positive tests through random and post-accident, those are drivers that are on duty. I would say because we've only had 5,300 violations reported for reasonable suspicion, motor carriers have really got to step up their game. They have got to start really paying attention to their drivers. Mm-hmm. They need to have interaction with them. And then we need to get that random and that post-accident number. We need to get those to come down. And I think the reasonable suspicion one needs to increase. I mean, it's we got.
And that's people that are interacting with the drivers before they leave.
Absolutely.
Come back.
Absolutely. Well, every company should have their supervisors trained in reasonable suspicion. I think part of the problem is they'll go through, they'll do the reasonable suspicion training, they get the certificate to appease the federal government, but then it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. I mean, I've had big events at training centers or hotels where we'll bring in a large group of people, and companies always sit together, and it never fails. I'll be up there talking about about different circumstances, and all of a sudden one of those groups from one of those companies, you'll see the huddle, and they all gather up, and they're all whispering, and we'll take a break, and I'll meander over there and just ask them, hey, what's going on? Did I touch on a hot topic for you? And I've been told more than one time, well, you just described one of our drivers, and he has been exactly what you described since the day we hired him. And so they'll tell me what's going on, and it's like, yeah, you probably hired a driver that drinks alcohol.
Functioning alcoholic.
Yeah. Somebody that's, they're just constantly.
And do you think it's hard for these guys to say something? Because, you can ruin a guy. You just chopped his job.
Oh yeah, that's
potentially
that's huge point there, and you're exactly right. The fear of being wrong. I think that I'll get the call from one supervisor in a company, and they're straight up like, they're going to get us sued if we send this guy in for a test. And I always tell them, take a deep breath and think about the consequences. If you do nothing, and the guy goes out there and crashes at that particular point, then we're 100% going to get sued because you did nothing. And once they start to look at it from that light, and I also let them know, look, what's your observations? When you take all your observations and can articulate that that's actually suspicion, we're not firing the guy on the spot. We're going to detain him. We're going to prevent him from completing a safety sensitive function, which is loading a truck, working around a truck, working on the truck, and of course driving the truck. And you're going to prevent them until you get that test result comes back. So we're not going to terminate them right off. We're going to eliminate them from working for a couple days and until we get that result back. But then once that result comes back, if it comes back negative, then hey, drugs or alcohol wasn't the issue. At that point, then you can start a supervisory intervention. Try to build up a driver if they're having some problems. But what I have found is almost 100% of the time when companies call me and say, hey, we think we got reasonable suspicion, I have yet to see one come back negative. We get to that point that it's noticeable. They're coming back positive.
I guess I see it. Now, if you're a manager and you're managing a fleet, that is your job.
It is.
You do. It doesn't matter how close you get to these guys, how many good friends you got working for you, whatever.
Yeah.
That is your job, is to protect the company.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I look at where I work, and if I had reasonable suspicion of somebody, that's uncomfortable. That's going to be hard. I've never had to deal with that, but
yeah. I think how do we overcome that? I think the biggest thing is as a safety manager within a company, number one, you have to be trained, right? And like I said earlier, the FMCSA requires the supervisors to get trained, but they don't require any recurrent training per se. You'll have a guy that'll get his certification for reasonable suspicion, and the certificate will be 20 years old. And this stuff is out of sight, out of mind. And I can only remember, back in my trooper days, when I got those first DUIs, just absolutely how upside down and scared to death I was, because that's you're investigating somebody for DUI. It was a whole lot different several years later after I got a whole lot of experience in that. I was a lot more comfortable with my abilities. So I think one thing that can really help alleviate that is, number one, train more often, train frequently. I recommend for my clients to make sure that you refresh on that training so you're comfortable with it at least 2 to 5 years, somewhere at least redo that training. I think, probably 2 to 3 years is a better statement, just to keep it, if we really want to increase the number of reasonable suspicion tests versus the number of positive and post-accident tests we have out there. The only way we're going to truly prevent drivers from driving while on a substance or something like that is to be really active with that. So, getting retrained. And secondly, these individuals need to remember, as they're talking to the drivers, or if they need to confront a driver in one of these situations, to just stick with the facts. I think so much time we get caught up as humans that we need to try to moralize it, or we need to put excuses out there like so-and-so's going through a tough time or whatever. And I think just straight up sticking with the facts, what we're seeing, what's led us to our decisions to do a test today, is going to really make that process a little bit easier for those individual managers. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting landscape there. We're seeing the same type of trend also, Keith. If you look down there, you're seeing a bigger trend. But when it comes to alcohol, the script does kind of of flipped a little bit. And, you see for the pre-employments, that number is way, way down. And that's just because companies are not required to do a pre-employment drug screen. And there's kind of some rules in there that if they are going to do that, they have to do it for everybody. So you don't see that many positive for
alcohol screening?
For alcohol screening, yeah. So when you come down, you'll notice the random is a lot. That's your number one testing circumstance there. But if you go down to post-accident, it's nice to see that one drops down quite a bit. A total of 700.
Well, the pre-employment, you're applying for a job, and alcohol gets out of your system a lot faster, doesn't it?
It does, and you'd be kind of foolish to show up for a job with alcohol in your system. Like, people clean themselves up for that.
Obviously, it's not zero.
Yeah, it's not. But if you jump down, you'll notice the reasonable suspicion. There's a little bit more of a spike there, in comparison to drugs. And I think that's just because alcohol is so much easier to detect. But we're still seeing a lot of the reasonable suspicions on there. So drivers are showing up with, alcohol in their breath or whatever the situation. Companies are a lot more comfortable sending that person in for the test. And I think a lot of times, I think this is the big one, a lot of times people think that in order to send somebody in for a reasonable suspicion test, they straight up believe that they've got to be demonstrating intoxication right in front of them, and that's not how it works at all. Like when I was a trooper, I had to build probable cause to make the arrest to take somebody to jail. I had to basically put them through roadsides. I had to do cross all the T's and dot all the I's to make sure that I was justified in arresting somebody. We're not at that level at a company. All we need to have is reasonable suspicion. Well, reasonable suspicion could be a period of time. It can be signs of withdrawal, things like that. As long as what you're seeing is contemporaneous right now in the day that we're making that review. But you could see it over a period of time where an employee, maybe their work degrades, or they have excessive absences or tardiness, and that kind of happens. And you're like, finally, today's the day I'm going to talk to this individual. And you walk in and you talk to the individual. They showed up on time. They're clean. They're ready to go. It looks like, hey, they're on the top of their game. Today might not be the day to send that individual in for the test. But tomorrow, if that guy shows up and exhibiting the same behavior that you saw in the last time, to now I'm seeing those observations, probably ought to do a drug test, see what's going on, see if drugs are leading up to that. And really the only way we can get to the bottom of that is by training. Individuals need to come in and do some training. The next thing I'd like to kind of talk about, if you just kind of glance over to the next page here, Keith, that's going to be page number 8. Page 8 is just the violations reported. And I think this one is absolutely fantastic because it shows all the substances. So the DOT programs test for those 5 major substances and their derivatives. So when you kind of go through and you look at this, you can see number 1, top of the list is marijuana. 100%. Like, it used to be like when a driver would go take a vacation and go to Amsterdam. It's like, hey, we're going to do the drug test on that guy when they get back. Now it's like, hey, we're taking a vacation to Colorado. It's like, okay, yeah, we better do the drug test, that kind of thing. But it's pretty fascinating because this report goes through, it shows you the numbers of positive tests for marijuana, all these different substances from 2020 all the way through 2025. Okay, and this is kind of a mid-year review. So in 2020, we had 29,000 positive tests. In 2020, we had 32,000. 2022 is the big year. We were almost up to 39,500. So we were breaking that trend and still kind of climbing. And then the trend started to go down again in 2023. There was a total of 37,000 positive tests, almost 38,000. And then in 2024, it dropped again, went down to 34,900. So almost 35,000 positive tests. Right now for 2025, mid-year, we're already up to 20,000 positive tests.
So we're on track to go to 40.
We're on track to hit 40 this year, and again, it's just kind of a lot of education within the companies, talking with drivers, but a lot of it is also paying attention to reasonable suspicion. I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing within marijuana industry is this technique called dosing. And dosing, it's kind of laughable. It kind of reminds me of the old uncle that at least I had in my family that, he was just a functioning alcoholic, and he was always drunk, but you never saw him saw him drink a thing, but he'd get up and leave the room every once in a while. So I think we all know where he was going, but he would maintain that BAC. Well, we're seeing that with weed. We're seeing where people are, they call it dosing, and they're just maintaining. They're using marijuana products throughout their shift, throughout their day. They're so brazen, they might even use it right in front of you, and you don't know that it's there. Wouldn't
you smell it?
Well, some of the products you might, but there's so many products in the marijuana industry right now that, they can hide it. It's designed to hide it.
Smoke it, do they?
In the good old days, we had marijuana live, like just the bud and the plant, and it was very pungent. It had that odor. Yeah. You put that in a truck. Truck sits in the sun for an hour. You open the door, and the whole truck just reeks of marijuana. These new products are designed to hide it.
Gummies.
Hide it today.
I've seen advertisements all over the internet and stuff for gummies.
Oh yeah, they got gummies. The edibles. You've got vapes, and vapes is.
Do
big.
Gummies smell? No.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah. No, they're the vaping products, I think, is the big one. I think the edibles. I think people in turn have a really hard time regulating the edibles. So I think drivers will stick with the vaping products because they can control how much they're putting in their body over a period of time. Right now, if you just walk down the street, you go downtown and eat lunch and just look around at people and you see vaping going on everywhere. And I believe the majority of those vapes are probably nicotine vapes. The biggest thing amongst your teams is when you see somebody vaping, if it's a nicotine vape, they're usually pretty eager to talk about it because they got all the flavors of the world. It's like every flavor in the rainbow type situation. And most of the people that do nicotine vapes, they're pretty eager to, oh yeah, this is whatever flavor and that flavor. Heck, I've even ran into people that carry their own plastic tips so you can share it and try their nicotine vape. So, so there's a lot of that out there, but I think a lot of it is, communicate, talk to if you see a driver vaping, talk to them about it.
I guess I always think about my days growing up as Cheech and Chong. They kick the side doors of the van open and here comes the smoke.
Oh yeah. Yeah. In trucking, and I think just the world around the marijuana industry is like they're goal oriented in creating products that are very easy to hide, very easy to use, just right out in plain sight. And, cause they want their product everywhere. The more they make like that, the more they sell. So, yeah, it's a really interesting topic. But anyways, coming down for number 2 of your positive tests, we got cocaine coming in number 2 at total amount of tests is 53,000. Right now, mid-year for cocaine, we're up to 5,000. So in 2024, their total positive tests were 10,078 positive tests. So in 2025, mid-year, we're already at 5,442. So we're trending up for 2025. Trying to move up there. Then from there, you move into your drug that's coming in number 3, and that would be the amphetamines, methamphetamines, amphetamines in pill format, and then you have the ecstasy and MDMA. And we're dealing with about 53,000 total positive tests from the start of that. But if you look at those trend numbers too, just for amphetamines, methamphetamines mid-year, we're up to 2,500, and you can see in 2024 total tests for that whole year for meth was 4,588. So we're trending to beat that one too.
Everything looks like it's trending up.
It absolutely is. Everything is trending in the upward direction. You come down to coming in at number 3 is going to be your opioids. Everything from oxymorphone down to 6-acetylmorphine, we have total positive tests. With that one, we're up to about 27,000 positive tests for all the different opioids that are out there in the market right now. If you believe this, the DOT does not test for fentanyl; it's not in the test. So they are. I know you're kind of giving me the angry eyes right now, Keith.
Really?
Yeah. I'm dead.
That's all that's in the news.
That's all that's in the news. There's a push to get it added to the list, but if you look down through that list of the positive tests, you notice that there's nothing for fentanyl in there. So the DOT, shame on you guys. You need to get your butts in gear and get that figured out. Total of 27,000 for the different out there. The one that always kind of makes me chuckle here though is down at the bottom. You've got PCP, phenylcyclidine, right? It's like the 80s called and they want their drugs back. We might even say, hey, the 60s called. But, it is a pretty small number. We've got a total, since the start of the FMCSA Clearinghouse, we got a total of about 406 positive tests for PCP. So it is still out there, but, ooh, man, I feel sorry for anybody that's got to deal with a driver that's got PCP in their system. That's some definitely psychotic, mind altering things that are down there. And then just one more thing I'll point out at the bottom of this page is you've got the number of dilute specimens. Okay, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later. The dilute is where a driver has done something, tampered with their specimen. Maybe they've decided to drink, 2 gallons of water before they test, or maybe they put something in their urine and something came up. But this would be a dilute that is a positive. It's showing that, hey, the urine's been tampered with, but it's still a positive. And there was a total of 14,000 positive tests identified for that one since the start of the clearinghouse. So I think a lot is going on with this clearinghouse. I think the biggest thing, though, is if you get that positive test, how it's going to really affect you. So today, how it's going to affect you is, number one, if you get that positive test, it gets reported to the FMCSA Clearinghouse, which basically essentially bans that driver from driving, as long as the company is doing their queries like they're supposed to, pulling that up. So when they hire somebody, they have to do that pre-employment query that pulls up that driver's history. Okay, but what we're seeing a lot of times there is, like, they'll hire that driver, but they'll pull the number, but they'll do the query, but the driver has to log into their account to grant that one-time access. And drivers are coming back saying, oh, I can't get access, or it's not working. That should be a red flag all day long, because then a lot of companies, they get frustrated with us and say, well, you're not doing your part. And it turns out we did request the query. The driver never allowed that query to go through, because they have to log into their account and grant that one-time access. And so they'll go ahead and hire the driver. They'll put them to work. And then, I don't know, a few months later, we'll actually find the positive test. It's like, well, there's a reason why that didn't happen. Yeah. And I think, Keith, if you really want to talk to that point, if you look at page 9, you can see these numbers of this report, because this is actually showing the CDL holders that are actually in the return to duty process. Now, with that, you can see we've got a total drivers with violations, 309,000 that are out there. But when you go down to the green, okay, only 116,000 of these drivers are entered in are not prohibited. So only 116,000 have actually done the return to duty process and completed all their follow-up testings. Well, no, let me correct that statement. Only 116,000 drivers have had a return to duty test. When you go down and look at the numbers, that's 81,000 drivers have had the negative test reported. Now, the big thing with this one, Keith, is it's up to the company. The company has to do the report on this clearinghouse. I think they forget, and they think, oh, the MRO does it. The lab at the medical review officer, they only report the positive test. So if you send somebody in to do a return to duty test and it's negative, you as the company have to do the reporting to the clearinghouse to say that driver has cleared. Now, this one's going to be greatly impacted, because maybe you've heard about it, but the states are now starting to cancel CDLs with a prohibited status on their clearinghouse. Have you been familiar with that at all?
I am not.
So it's a progress in work, but it's right now we're seeing takes about 60 to 90 days for the state to catch up with the clearinghouse. It was eventually, I think they're going to make it to where it is instantaneous. So if you get a violation report of the clearinghouse, instantly the license is going to go into cancellation status. But right now we're kind of seeing it's about 60 to 90 days. So if a driver gets a positive and you're doing their hiring and you're just running an MVR, their license might still be good if they've got a positive in the clearinghouse, but eventually it should should be suspended.
It will catch them.
Yeah. So if you kind of go through and look at these numbers here, you can definitely tell that there is, some numbers and some turnaround. But right now, 192,000 drivers are not participating or have not done anything to correct their CDL. And it really kind of depends where they're at. And I think the biggest thing to stay on top of this, you got to always think if someone's knocking on your door and wants a job, chances are, you know what? They might have a positive test out there, so you just have to really be paying attention to that. So this Clearinghouse report does have some absolutely great information in it, so we'll make sure that that's published up and talked about. As far as like reasonable suspicion, though, I'm gonna throw a real quick plug out there for my company, dotuniversity.org. We do have a reasonable suspicion class that's out there. It's got what I think is a really great marijuana update. A lot of the individuals, they just straight up don't know how to find that. And Keith, I'm looking at you right now because you're kind of in that boat. Like, how are you going to learn what kind of products are out there? And I think everybody thinks
call you.
I'm going to call you. I think everybody thinks, well, if that's the case, they got to use marijuana. And believe it, the information's out there, and you do not have to use marijuana to become educated on marijuana. So, great class, dotuniversity.org, reasonable suspicions on there. You can take that class online. We do a lot of classes live. So if you want to book your company and get a bunch of people trained, give us a call, and we'll get you some information on that. But train often, train frequently. It's going to make people a little bit more comfortable with these topics, and they're pretty crazy out there. And we also run a drug and alcohol testing program. So if you need some help with that, don't hesitate. We're happy sometimes just to provide guidance. Sometimes companies are with a really great program, they just need information. Mm-hmm. So we try to make sure we offer, a solution for everybody. So if you just need some help, feel free to reach on out to us. So, yeah. All right. Well, I think that brings us to, one of my favorite topics of the day, and that's going to be TFAO or TAFO of the day, the truck around and find out of the day. And Keith, I think you might have a little story about some drug and alcohol testing that you could throw into this.
I do have my CDL. Obviously, I've had it for years. And being as that, Rush does their random testings and everything like that. And so I went in, and it was a normal, I get 1 or 2 a year that randoms. I went in, and I thought, well, I'll just go do this on the west side of Greeley there at the hospital where they do the testing. And then I'll go to lunch and come back to my office. And went in, did the normal drug testing and peed in the cup and everything, and I'm getting ready to leave. And she says, hang on a second. It says here you need an alcohol test. And I said, an alcohol test? And this is the first time that it ever happened. She says, are you in management? I said, no. She says, are you in sales? I said, yes. She said, well, management and sales are more susceptible to alcohol abuse than the other employees. And I was like, oh. Okay. I said, well, good thing it was before lunch. The lady didn't think that was very funny.
Oh, my goodness.
I was like, hang on. I'm just kidding. So,
yeah, they take their jobs pretty serious in there, don't
that
they?
Was,
I could only imagine the look she threw you. Probably some daggers. Pretty good for sure.
She did not see the humor in that.
Yeah. That's a funny one. I know the stuff they have to put up with at the collection sites because running our program, I think we've got about 1,700 drivers in our driver pool, and just the stories that I get from stuff that these drivers try to pull, it gets crazy. It gets crazy. So, my TFAO. I've got it all mixed up today. I'm all kinds of bass backwards. My truck around and find out TAFO. Let me get the letters right. Is going to be about knowledge, like how to pass a drug test, and that's an interesting topic. And before I really get into the meats and potatoes of this, I'm just going to give a little bit of backstory. Going clear back to my trooper days, I got the idea from a trainer at a drug interdiction class that I went to, and it made a lot of sense. And he taught us, he said, hey, you know what? You should probably read the publication that the criminals like to publish their secrets. And we just all kind of looked at each other, and he asked us, have you ever heard of High Times Magazine? Now, Keith, before you and I ever started talking about this, had you ever heard of High Times magazine?
I had not.
Yeah. It really only certain circles read High Times magazine. So I started reading High Times magazine back when I was a trooper, and I lived in a real small town. I can only think what the mailman thought when he'd bring the trooper the High Times magazine with pictures of marijuana on every cover, and all the different stories they had. I would imagine I was probably the talk of the town, but it was really helpful for me in my investigations, knowing what kind of products are out there. And that's going back, that's a long time ago. We're going back into, the early 2000s. Back in those days, a lot has changed in the marijuana industry since then.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely. Back then it was all just about smoking weed, all the different products like that. Nobody had ever heard of a vape. Edibles were the brownies that somebody would dump too much weed in there, and you'd hear the stories of somebody eating a brownie and getting couch locked for the next 12 hours, that kind of thing. But I started reading High Times because it's really good. Now, you're welcome to read High Times. You can go to they carry it at Barnes and Noble. If you wanted to go and pick up the magazine and sit down on one of their little couches they have and read that, I'm always scared that I'd have a client or somebody walk in and see me reading High Times and wouldn't give me a chance to explain myself, and they'd be like, "Yeah, we're leaving Ryan." So I don't subscribe to it anymore, but I just kind of review it when I need to. So High Times has got a website, and you can go there, and they got a search feature, and you can just hit that search feature and just type in an article or something you're interested in. So I went there and I just typed in "pass a drug test" and just see what kind of articles pop up, and you can type that out some different ways. And I've used this feature for a lot of years, and I introduced some of these articles in my reasonable suspicion testing. But I printed up just a one page of High Times magazine. We want to talk about Truck Around and Find Out. This is one of these areas that if you start dabbling and trying to cheat drug tests, you're gonna find out. It will catch up with you. But I went through and I pulled up a couple of these articles, and they always have backlinks in there, and one of the backlinks takes me to this website called UPass Fetish Urine, and you can see on this UPass Fetish Urine, and I'm going to hand this over so you can see this and kind of know what I'm talking about here, Keith. They're marketing it online as fetish urine, right? So the DOT or the government's not going to try to take it down because they're actually selling a material or a product, a commodity that somebody could buy and try to use that to pass the drug test. But one of these articles are in here. They're talking about how to pass. One is the only foolproof way to pass. And when you read that whole article, it's straight up like giving you step by step of how to use fake urine, this synthetic pee. And here's the thing I'm going to tell you. Drivers get caught with this. So if you're looking at this and you're thinking about dabbling in this little market with this fake pee, you're going to get caught, and you're going to get caught in a major way. Now, the FMCSA can go after drivers individually, okay? But if you get caught with fake pee, it's going to be an instant refusal, okay? If you submit fake pee, okay, if the collectors do what they're supposed to and follow the proper protocols, they're going to know it's fake pee because it is not actual pee. You got temperature issues. You got the way the product bubbles, the way the product smells. A lot of the guys there, before they seal it, they're supposed to give it the good old sniff test. It kind of grosses me out, but they sniff it, okay, and it's not pee, and it doesn't smell like pee. I'm sure just like any other product, they're getting better at it, but they're trying to hide their product by calling it a fetish urine. But we all know what it's actually for. Anyways, these articles go through and give drivers step by step, and I can poke holes in each one of those steps, because as soon as that gets recognized that urine is either out of temperature, it's either too hot or too cold, that didn't obviously come out of the human body, then they instantly have to go through and pee again. So that driver can't leave the premises. They have to stay there, and they've got 3 hours, and they go into what's called shy bladder protocol, and they're going to have to give a specimen. Okay, so it's without a doubt they're going to have to give that specimen, and that second draw is going to be under an observed, review at that particular point. So definitely, going to watch that. Now, if you're looking at your articles there, you'll notice that there are a couple companies on there that even sell prosthetics for the observed collection. So, if you're brazen enough to strap a prosthetic device in your pants and try to do it that way, I just wish you the best of luck. But I would encourage, all your safety managers, you need to understand what the weed market is out there, so you could see if drivers are using weed right smack in front of you. You can get on the websites of dispensaries. You can kind of scroll through their products. You can go to High Times Magazine. You can see the different things that are out there, but be inquisitive. You see somebody vaping, ask questions about it. You're going to know real quick if somebody had a weed vape, because they're not going to want to talk about it. They're going to get real uneasy, that kind of thing. If you see somebody eating some gummies or something like that, if somebody eats just one gummy and puts the bag away, I don't know about you, Keith, but if I get a bag of gummies, I'm going to eat the whole damn bag. So
even if I don't intend to.
Yeah, exactly.
The whole thing's going down.
Not going to just put one in my mouth and then put the bag away. It's not that type of thing. So I think really just pay attention, get out there, and let's work together and see if we can get these reasonable suspicion test numbers up and start lowering the positives for random and especially post accident. But anyways, all right. You got anything you want to throw in there?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for tuning in to the Truck Around and Find Out podcast today. We'll be coming back at you with another one here shortly.
Yep. Take care, guys. Thank you.
Be safe out there, and thank you for what you do.